Hello, and welcome back to the Creators Guild podcast. I'm Chris Howell, and with me is
Jared Lovelady.
and we are here to talk about all things creative. Mostly, we're going to talk about our creative process that includes our book, which, if you haven't bought, again, go out and buy it. We're going to keep telling you that. And today, we're going to have a guest on who she actually helped work with the book, gave us some really good tips, did some content editing for us. We decided not to hate her for her wonderful feedback.
It was very helpful.
Yes, it was very helpful. She definitely helped us improve. So
She's responsible for probably 5 chapters in there.
probably, yeah, after her review, we were like, son of a, we suck. But hey, we did it and we got a book published. So it's out there. So Liz is going to join us today. But as usual, we are going to start off with reading. And we are at chapter 15, A Trip to the Market. Chapter 15, A Trip to the Market. Cycle of Aolith, year 12182. There is no greater crime than the intentional destruction of another's soul. Chronicles of a Queen, Arid Fredoc. The next morning, Athandra walked at Tawara's side as they left the market in Tradoc, crossing the main road that led into the city proper. It was nothing special to Athandra. She had been to plenty of markets in various cities and towns throughout this realm as well as her own. But Tawara was anxious to get out of the manor house and had urged Athandra out the door. Athandra liked this version of Tawara better than the one she had met the previous morning. After their introduction, Athandra had been dismissed and had spent the day familiarizing herself with the house and grounds. She had not seen Tawara the rest of the day until they dined together with Premier Corvin that evening. He had been cordial, but distant, and had made it abundantly clear that when Tawara was not alone in her rooms, Athandra was to be at Tawara's side. Midway through the evening, a servant interrupted their dining to bring Corvin a message. Corvin then left early, remarking on surprise business involving special orders needing to be issued to the house guard. Athandra had been pleased to see him. It was he, after all, who had made it possible for her to be in this lofty position. They walked together in silence for a time, and Athandra enjoyed hearing the sounds of merchants hawking their wares, blacksmith hammers ringing on anvils, and general hustle and bustle of people doing their daily business. "Do you know very much about Trekken?" Tawara asked as they walked. "I much prefer their market. They bring such interesting things. Their market is only here every few years or so, and humans change so quickly in that brief time. I've seen some of them grow from children to old and gray. They are really the only change by which I can measure time in my world." "There are Trekken bands that pass through Adamar," Athandra replied. "The Wood Elves are a bit more welcoming to other races than the High Elves, so the Trekken come more often, stay longer, and are therefore less exotic to us." Tawara frowned at Athandra's insinuation. "It is not that we are less welcoming, we just have proprieties to follow is all. The Trekken are welcome here in Tradoc. They have been coming here for far longer than I have been alive. When my mother was alive, they were welcomed with a banquet in the manor house." "Yes, but that kind of thing has long gone by the wayside," Athandra replied. "If I remember correctly, your mother has been gone over 100 years. That is more than a lifetime for the humans." "I had not thought of it like that," Tawara said thoughtfully. "Now that I think of it, my father has never done anything to make the Trekken welcome when they come to Tradoc. In fact, it seems that their visits have become increasingly sparse as time has passed." Tawara's face took on a sour expression. "I would place most of my father's animosity toward the Trekken at Corvin's feet," she stated flatly. "He seems only to have negative things to say about them. Or anyone for that matter," she added as an afterthought. "Oh, I don't know. He seems cordial enough to me," said Athandra. "Well, he is always cordial," Tawara replied snidely, "even when he is stabbing someone in the back. Honestly, I do not know how you can stand him." "It isn't as if I am dear friends with the man," Athandra replied. "I only met him a short time ago, when he came to my mother to discuss my preparation for the handmaid position. I have him to thank for that, I suppose. He came to us personally." Tawara gave Athandra a sidelong glance. "It is rather odd how quickly you were able to assume a role as a handmaid to a princess. To hear Tessera speak of it, it is a protracted process, which can take a year or more to prepare for." No one was more surprised than I, Athandra said nonchalantly. My mother had talked about me filling such a position when I was younger, and even submitted my name for consideration. Part of my training for the last 20 years has been that of courtly instruction. My work as a tutor among some of the higher houses in Kuvia and Adamar may also have had something to do with it. That is, in fact, what I was doing when Corvin came to us. My mother and I were staying at an estate in Duranta while I tutored an earl's daughter. Be that as it may, Tuara replied. In time I am quite certain you will come to see him as the snake that everyone else sees him clearly to be. Athandra was a bit taken aback by Tuara's vehemence, yet she took it in stride. After all, Tuara had been restricted to her house for over a month under Corvin's direction. She was bound to feel some animosity toward the man. Rounding the last corner of the town, to reach the Trekkan market, Tuara froze where she stood. Athandra, who had been distracted by 2 elven children playing in the road, had nearly run into her. What is it, my lady? Athandra asked. Tuara did not immediately reply. Rather, she stood silently, looking at what appeared to be a market being closed down. The bustle of a mixture of humans and colorful attire filled the market grounds as they loaded wares into their bright blue wagons and carts. Athandra had seen many Trekkan bands and visited countless Trekkan markets. The Trekkan were known for their joviality and whimsical nature. This was a somber group, not at all what she had been expecting. There was a general hurried, distracted feel to the entire process. Athandra noted the distinct lack of children. Most of the Trekkan children would have remained in camp, but a Trekkan market always had children. I wonder why they are leaving, Athandra said. It is still market season. It's not like a Trekkan band to leave a venue so early. Tuara was still looking around, searching for something. There they are, Tuara said, sighing. Rothel and Shalea are still here. They are packing as well, but at least I will have the opportunity to introduce you. She smiled at Athandra. Come, I am sure you will adore them. Only be prepared for a torrent of questions and no opportunity to answer. Shalea is a world-class talker. Tuara seized Athandra's hand and began marching purposefully toward one of the wagons on the north side of the market. Athandra, half led, half dragged, followed her. As they approached, Tuara began to slow. Standing in front of the wagon were a rotund man and woman. The man held one meaty arm around the woman's shoulder. The woman wore grief on her face like a mask. Something is wrong, Tuara, Athandra said, pulling Tuara to a stop. They were nearly 20 paces from the pair. The man's eyes came up and landed on Tuara and Athandra. His grief was replaced momentarily by what Athandra could only describe as rage, followed by fear, finally returning to grief. The woman must have sensed the change. She raised her head and followed his gaze. When she saw Tuara, a wail burst from her lips, and she turned, pushing past the man, fleeing up the steps of the small wagon. The man turned and followed her, without a backward glance. Rothel, Shalea! Tuara called after them, but they made no effort to turn back or even slow their way into the wagon. Tuara turned to Athandra and shook her head in bewilderment. I do not know, she began, but immediately cut off, startled. Athandra turned her head and was startled herself. Standing immediately next to her was a tall soldier in burnished breastplate, with the Umari crest intricately worked in red and blue, clutched in a dragon's talons, matching blue leather gloves, and a helmet with a white plume under his arm. Captain Ethrin? Said Tuara in surprise. What is happening here? I'm sorry, Princess, the captain replied softly. His face was forlorn, and he had a haggard look in his eyes. I tried. He appeared to struggle with words. I tried, my lady. There was nothing I could do. Captain, what do you mean? I demand to know what is happening here. Tuara's voice had an edge of panic to it, and she made to step past the captain. Why are they leaving? What is wrong with Rothel and Shalea? Her voice cut off in a choke, and her face paled. No, she whispered. She stared toward the far end of the market. Her breath came in short gasps, and Athandra could see tremors pass through Tuara's body. Athandra watched the exchange in puzzlement, then followed Tuara's gaze. Her stomach felt as if it would empty itself right there. At the far end of the market, ignored by the bustle of Trekkan, there was a small area cleared of people. It was guarded by 6 soldiers in full regalia. 2 tall poles had been set in the ground, high enough that they were clearly visible from anywhere in the market grounds. Hanging from the poles were 2 bodies in brightly colored garb. Athandra couldn't make out the features. The faces were swollen and bloodied. The bodies were hung from the poles by their hands, tied high overhead. The clothing was clean, however, as though it had been freshly washed. One of the bodies was clearly female, dressed in matching burgundy vest and knee-high riding boots decorated with brass studding that glinted in the morning sun. From the other body, red and yellow sashes fluttered in the breeze as the sun reflected off a golden ring binding them. "My lady," Athandra began, but was cut off by a gesture from Tawara. She wanted to pull Tawara away, but the princess was enthralled by the gruesome sight. "Corvin?" Tawara asked, the question clearly directed to Captain Ethrin. Still, she did not take her eyes off the bodies. The captain dropped his eyes and nodded gravely in response. Taking a deep breath, Tawara stepped past the captain and began to walk toward the soldiers. "My lady, please, come away," Captain Ethrin pleaded, taking a step towards Tawara, extending his hand to her. "There is no need to go any closer." "I will see this," Tawara replied through gritted teeth. As they approached, a soldier stood to the side of the scene, wearing a golden breastplate with a serpentine dragon across the full measure of the armor and a star on his right breast. His eyes found Tawara. As if on cue, he stepped forward and gave instructions to one of the soldiers standing guard. The guard saluted and walked to a small fire that was burning near the corpses. He picked up a torch and lit it before walking to set fire to piles of tinder that had been stacked at the bottom of each pole. A collective gasp came from the Trekkin, and all movement stopped in the square. "Bernard, what is this?" Captain Ethrin bellowed, rushing forward. "Orders, Captain," Bernard replied coolly, no emotion touching his voice. "Simply following orders." "Whose orders, Lieutenant? What kind of sickening display is this?" Before Bernard could respond, Tawara cut off the conversation with a scream. Athandra, startled, turned to look at her. Tears were streaming down Tawara's face, and she stood frozen. Athandra turned. To her horror, she saw the girl in the burgundy boots and vest kicking against the pole as the flames licked at the bottom of her feet. Athandra doubled over, sicking up. The other body began to thrash. Croaking cries could be heard coming from each of their mouths as the swollen faces contorted in agony. The Trekkin pushed forward toward the small ring of soldiers, many crying, "They're not dead! They're alive!" Tawara joined the crowd, rushing forward, screaming at the soldiers, but it was no use. The soldiers had their weapons drawn, and the heat from the pyres kept the crowd at bay. The thrashing seemed to last an eternity. In reality, it was only a few minutes before all movement stopped and the colorful clothing was burned to char. The pyres were not big enough to create consuming fires. In a brief time, all flames had died away, and 2 smoking corpses hung from the poles. The shouting of the crowd gave way to weeping and muted wails. Clusters of Trekkin fell to the ground and held one another, unable to draw themselves away from witnessing the ghastly scene. Tawara fell to her knees. As the thrashing of the bodies stopped, she buried her head in her hands, her body shaking, racked with sobs. Athandra knelt beside her, her own face red and her cheeks streaked with tears. She placed a hand on Tawara's shoulder, and the princess-elect fell into Athandra's embrace. "It is my fault," she cried between sobs. "Athandra, it is all my fault." Athandra simply held on, her tears continuing to fall into the princess's hair. They sat in the dirt for a long time. Athandra did not know how long. No one approached them. No one tried to comfort them. Athandra watched as the crowd of Trekkin slowly stirred themselves. In small groups, they mounted their wagons and drove their teams away, leaving the remnants of unpacked goods and personal items to litter the market square. When Tawara finally stirred, her face was ashen, her eyes rimmed red. She rose slowly, staring into the distance so as to make no eye contact with anyone. She stood and looked at the scene for a long moment before declaring, "I'm going to see Corvin." She turned, setting her jaw, and strode resolutely from the square, not waiting for Athandra. So,
Fun chapter.
yeah. Some people who've read our books early on hate us. So, you might hate us too, but it's all part of the story. It's all part of the plot.
It's required.
Yeah.
It,
Yeah, I mean, we've got different forms of feedback, different levels of praise and animosity from that chapter, but we wanted to make the world in which our people live. It's a fantasy world, but it's not a make-believe dream world where everything is utopian. We wanted it to be, as we've said in the past, we want to punch you right in the feels. So, some bad things happen in our story. But all of them happen for a reason. And all of them happen because, as a direct result of decisions that people make, whether good or bad, decisions that they make and conspiracies that they're involved in, or plots that they're trying to contribute to. So, and all of that adds to the plot of our book. So with that, I'm going to invite Liz to come and join me. So Liz wanted to join us. She said she wanted to read chapter 15 with us because she had some thoughts.
Yes, well, I think everybody's going to have thoughts on this chapter.
Yeah.
So the original one had... Is it okay if I say what it originally had?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Okay. So the original one actually had all 4 people die in the scene.
Yes.
And I remember the first time I read it, if it wasn't on my computer, I probably would have thrown it across the room. I was so mad because it's I've spent almost half the book and I loved these characters and they just all died. So it was really rough. And that was actually one of my points when I gave you a critique. I was like, okay, this can't be.
Yeah.
It was a little too soul crushing.
Yeah.
So you guys came back with this version, and yes, people still die, but I actually like it because there's this. The thing with writers is you have to put your characters through horrible times in order to make them better in the end. So you have to have that, and having that, having it be the 2 of them. The 2 that were gonna get married.
Yeah.
It made sense to me because there's also this rule in the story world that if someone is having a happy story, like if it's gonna be happily ever after, they're gonna die. That's the way it works.
Yeah.
So I think it actually worked really well. But the comical part is when I read this the second time, when I got the actual book and read how you guys did it, I was reading it at work.
Mm-hmm.
And I was on lunch, and I sat down, and I read it. I was like, I'm just going to skip this chapter. I don't want to read it. But I was like, no, I should read it. So I was going through it, and I got to the part where she sees them and all that kind of stuff, and it said 2 poles. And I literally stopped, and I was like, oh, no, I read that wrong. And I went back and read it again. I was like, no, it says 2. And I
I know, they messed up.
Yeah. I stood up from my chair, and I was like, it's only 2. Thankfully, I was the only one in the room, so I didn't have to explain that to anybody. But I got so excited. So I think that's kind of funny, because when I read that chapter, I was happy, and everybody else is going to be sad when they read it.
Yeah. Maybe we should put out the alternate version and be like, before you read chapter 15, read the old chapter 15.
Yeah.
So you can feel a little bit better about it.
Yeah, just a little bit. So, but anyway, so I thought that was a good way to, like I said, put her through the fire still, but have that, there's still hope. We didn't just lose everybody we knew.
Yeah.
I mean, you still kind of did, because you don't know where the twins are right now, but
yeah,
you're hoping they're still out there.
Yeah. And it's, we kind of talked through that, Jared and I did, after your critique, and we said, well, yeah, it makes sense, that exact conversation of they've just declared their love and they're going to move on. And then we're like, nope, but it, like you said, it makes sense for them. It also fit, and it'll fit not really giving anything away here, but from the Trekken perspective, Jeffrem and Traylon are adults.
Mm-hmm.
So from the world that they live in, yeah, we just got to know these characters. They're very young. They're just barely adults, but they are officially adults. And we kind of made the decision of, well, from a law perspective, even, whatever's going to happen in this world surrounding these 2, do we want to make a barbaric society, make the society so barbaric that, hey, there's these 2 adults, and also we're going to burn these children alive too? That's a pretty big...
Yeah, that's a big statement.
That was that would be a very big...
There was a lot of back and forth on this chapter.
Yeah.
We just we were like, well, we're going to kill him, and then it'll be public. And then I can't remember if it was you or me, but one of us said, what if we burn them?
Yeah.
And then we bounced that off of Jackie and Adam, and they were like, that's my brother and sister-in-law.
Mm-hmm.
And they were like, I don't know, that's awful dark.
Yeah. Well, and when we talked about it, like, there's some things that come up. There's a reason it was done the way that it was done that fit in with who the Trekkin are, who the High Elves are, and the society that they live in. Like, some things that as a reader, you're just getting into this world that everything's seen through Tawara's perspective, you know. And then now we have a Thondra coming in. Everything's from their perspective so far. And you got to remember, it's a secluded, isolated princess who's been isolated her whole life, and she's a princess. Mm-hmm. And the world that she lives in outside of the walls of the manor house is not the world that actually exists. So
It's not what she read about in her books.
exactly. So
Which is kind of ironic, because one of her rationalizations for going out on these rides and things is, I'm going to learn things that I can't learn in the books.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So she thinks she's prepared because she's been out, when really she's only been in the front yard,
Yeah.
and now she's going downtown.
It's like,
So
Yeah.
you need to learn something from out of a book. Here's what it feels like to get slapped right in the face. You know? You can't get that in a book.
Life experiences, they're so great.
Yeah. So there will be, you know, like you said, at the end of chapter 15, we don't know where Jephram, or we don't know where Meg and Fram are.
Mm-hmm.
And
But it's the hope. The
Yes.
readers love the hope.
yeah,
They're just, oh, they're still out there somewhere, maybe.
yeah. Kind of, sometimes it's hard to talk about stuff without being like,
Spoilers.
let me tell you everything that's going on.
Yep.
But I wanted to, from anybody who's listening, and we talked about this a little bit earlier before we started this episode, is we're playing around with the idea of doing like a spin-off of the podcast and putting it on do like a Substack or something.
yeah, or a Patreon.
Yeah, something where we don't hold anything back on the other channel. So this channel, we talk through the books and then we interview people. We're thinking of doing a spin-off section where we talk deep world building, and we talk about where this whole story's going. So if we do that, you're gonna know everything. You are going to get the spoilers, all of them, unless we change it because it's not written yet.
That's the part of being part of the planning process, is so often it just changes, and
Well,
you just kind of have to roll with it.
and when we riff like that, when we're telling people the behind the scenes, or we changed this or whatever, a lot of times that will spark new content for us.
Yeah. Well, there have been times when we've met with Adam and Jackie, and we've got them on the phone. We're like, hey, we came up with this idea, we outlined it, but we need to run it by somebody before we start writing it because maybe we're crazy. And so we'll reach out to them, and they'll ask us some questions. And they ask the question, and then we're like, well, they're going to do X, Y, and Z, and this is how it's going to happen. And that didn't exist before that sentence just came out of our mouth.
Yep. Yeah, most
So,
of the
like-
stuff just kind of pops up in conversation.
Yeah, we literally were like, this is the story now. But we say it as though, oh, yeah, it's been that way the whole time. It's all, we've known this forever.
Yeah.
And it's like, nope, I literally just came up with that just now, and this is amazing.
Yeah, it's kind of like all authors, you know, like people read the books and like, oh, this is so amazing, all the foreshadowing, all this, like you were a genius. And we just agree with it because we don't want to tell them
Yeah.
that we fixed it in revisions.
Yeah, you just do let me wipe my
Exactly.
fingernails here because I'm amazing. So I wanted to take a little bit of time with Liz on the show. One, you are here. So we put in our acknowledgments up here at the beginning. So we added. So Shannon Bacon did our proof editing for us, and then a couple of our kids did our artwork, and then we said, and to Liz for her willingness to do a deep dive and break our hearts with your sincerity. Because we had multiple people read our book, and a lot of we would get little bits here and there of, well, I didn't understand this part, or I wasn't sure why this was written the way it was written, or I didn't know X, Y, or Z. And people would have some questions, or they might say, I would like to see this character do thing 1 or thing 2, And other than that, a lot of the feedback we got from everybody who read our book before doing beta reading was, oh, this is really good. We need more. And tell us when the next part is out. And we're like, well, okay, great. What do we need to do different? I just loved it. I think it's great.
Yeah, and it's like, that's great, but we need constructive feedback.
Yeah.
Because we know this book isn't perfect.
Yeah.
It's far from. And we need to know the points that it's weak, or if there's a plot hole or whatever.
Yeah.
And getting that feedback isn't easy.
Yeah, that's one thing I often say about beta readers. We love them, we need them, but you kind of almost have to train them to give you feedback, because as readers, their natural reaction is, I loved it or I hated it. They don't know how to analyze it or what kind of feedback is actually helpful for writers. So I often say you kind of have to train your beta readers, and it does take a while to find ones that are good at giving that feedback. As far as the emotional things, how did you react to this? Who's your favorite character? Things like that we want to know from our readers.
Yeah.
But then you have the writer feedback, which is more going into, like you guys were saying, of constructive feedback on how to improve plot, character, things like that readers don't think about analytically.
I think the harshest critique or that we got from anybody was a few people said, we had when Tawara, chapter 1, Tawara goes out for a ride, and then we went right on with, she goes for a ride, then she goes out to see the Trekkin, then they ride some more, then they go in the canyon, and a whole bunch of just, they're going on rides and they're having some things happen. And some feedback we got was, it kind of felt like it slowed down. It was slower through there, and I was waiting for something to happen. That's it? Yeah.
Yeah.
What? Oh my gosh. I need to pull this feedback out of your face.
Yep.
So, we posted our writing, and Liz got a hold of it, and then she came back. She's and we were actually talking about, hey, we're going to try to publish. We are doing we're doing proof editing right now. We've had so many people read and give us feedback that we're I guess we read it out loud multiple times. So we're all right, let's go ahead and publish. And then we got an email. And I started reading it, and then I called Jared, and I'm like, hey, we should go through this in detail, because this is the serious content feedback.
Yeah, the stuff we've been looking for months or longer.
Yeah.
And that's really what I guess made me want to do this for you guys. Is we were at one of our writer meetings, and you guys were talking about that, how you've gotten so much feedback and everybody loved it, and you still wanted more feedback. So that told me, I was okay, these are serious writers. They actually want to improve, because there are writers out there that just want to write something and they want you to enjoy it. And that's totally fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But they're not looking for serious feedback. And so you guys you seemed very passionate about it. And I was okay, I can really kind of maybe help these guys. And they seemed like they would be receptive to it. So I was like, okay, let's give it a try. Give me your book. And, I am a very analytical person, and I've been studying writing for a while because I do it myself. So I was like, I'll give you some feedback and see what we can do with it. And so, it was that eagerness of you guys wanting to learn more that I was really like, you know what, let me look at it. Kind of
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah, and it really, like I said, there wasn't anything that it was, well, there was a part at the end where I was like, Jared, oh, we just got stabbed. So part of it is, and I don't know that we really changed the part that I'm about to comment on.
Okay.
Is we got to the end of the critique, and at the very end, Liz, you wrote like a page and a half of, all right, I'm just going to do a summary
Yes.
of my thoughts in general. And the first thing was, I have to be honest, you don't have a story. And part of me was like, oh my gosh, Jared, we suck, we're terrible.
Yeah. So yeah, it was you guys don't have a plot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, but the reality is, we've talked about this a little bit of, this is the first volume of part 1, and this is like chapter 1 of 14 chapters. So we've tried to add we've gone in and added some things in that we tried not to force. We tried to say, okay, naturally, what is Tawara's ambition? What are her goals? And why do things change? But we didn't follow all of Liz's ideas.
And that is totally fine. That is
Yeah.
what editing is for. It is to give you feedback, to make you think analytically about your own stuff and make the decisions you think are best for the story.
Yeah.
If you follow exactly what an editor is doing all the time, I don't know, that to me just kind of feels like rolling over. It's okay to say no sometimes.
Yeah. And it really made it, like, doing that really helped us wake up a little bit to be like, hey, because we really had some deep discussions of, should we rewrite this? And after, like, slogging through sorrow for a few days or whatever, we went through and revised, added multiple chapters in to really try to bring some of the threats. And the point of book 1 is really, like we said, Tawara lives in a sheltered world. Mm-hmm. And the purpose of this book is, she's in this protective bubble, and that bubble is shattering. And so what we didn't do is go back and say, you know what, we're going to make an episode where there's a complete character arc or a story arc that begins with point A and then goes through all the standard story arc themes and gets you to an end of a part of a story. And, arguably there are some people who might pick up books, and when they get into that, they're going to be like, I don't want to keep reading this. Mm-hmm. And we had to make the decision of, are we okay with that?
Yeah. So I think you guys actually did a pretty good job of putting a plot in there. It's not a, solve the murder kind of thing. But there is that arc of, figuring out who's kind of going after her and how to counter that. There's the arc of her becoming less naive. But she has that goal. She has of being an accolade and also learning about the world. She has conflict that pushes against both of those. There's stakes. So, like, in what you guys did, you really did build a plot in there. Yeah. Like I said, it's not like a strong, like, A, B, C, D, but it's still enough that you feel like you're progressing in the story. You feel like there's a point. And I think you guys did a really good job of it, actually.
Thumbs up.
Thank you.
Two thumbs up, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And it was, it really forced us to exercise our writing brains and, jump through some mental hoops to say, because one of the things we talked about is I'm okay with episodic stories, but I'm not a fan of one of the problems I have with like if you're into like Murder She Wrote or the TV show Psych, where they get the bad guy at the end and then they get the bad guy at the end. Like sometimes if you're doing like all the Murder She Wrote episodes, you can watch them completely standalone, and they don't have to go together. And it's just like, okay, I'm going to sit down in this. I've got 30 minutes to watch TV, and I just want to know what happens in this episode. You know, or did you ever watch Kiefer Sutherland 24?
No, I haven't.
Have you seen that, Jared?
I've seen pieces, but I've not actually watched the show.
So it's every season is 24 hours.
Right.
There's some crazy thing that's happening.
So basically,
Yeah.
every show is an hour
Yeah.
Okay.
of time.
Oh.
Yeah. And so each episode is not really episodic in the classic sense of the word. Or, you know, you get through some point and then it's like, oh, that was hour one. Dun, dun, dun. Got to be ready for hour two. But even on a season perspective, you get through the whole season and I'm like, well, that was one day. And there's like threats of nuclear bombs and terrorists and, you know, skyscrapers falling and chaos and all of these things. And I don't remember how many seasons 24 went, but I'm like, let's say there were 10 seasons. So that's 10 days. And even if they're not, you know, 10 sequential days, there's 10 independent days. And each of those 10 independent days, crazy, giant, ridiculous stuff happens. And the good guy has to solve the problem and then win. And I'm like, if you approach things, in my opinion, episodic like that, statistically speaking, you're going to fail. Like, one of the times, the bomb's going to blow up and everybody's going to die. The one guy isn't going to save everybody all the time. You know, by the end of the episode, whatever they're trying to stop, nope, they're dead. And so when stories are written episodically like that, in my opinion, I'm like, even if I'm like, yeah, I enjoy like just going through the story, but from a getting deeper into the world perspective, I don't care for that. For me, it pushes me out of engaging with that world to a certain level, because I'm like, you've just overstepped like all of the, you know, you have these, they always win. There's always the big sword fight at the end, and they miraculously find a dagger in the dirt and stab the bad guy who was way stronger than them. And they do that over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh my gosh, you can't beat somebody if you're at level 10 and they're at level 800. There's a small chance you can beat them. There's an almost infinitesimally non-existent chance that you can beat them 500 times.
Yeah, it
Just
works,
once. It works once.
It works great on a standalone. Or if you have multiple characters that are being woven into an episodic plot.
Yeah.
But when it's the same hero against insurmountable odds every week or every book, it doesn't flow well. For me, it doesn't end well. Because, like you said, it's just not realistic at all.
Yeah, I think the people that like episodic storytelling are what I kind of call the passive fans. They want that familiarity. They want to know that, you know, she's going to solve the mystery in the end or whatever. And they just want to be able to watch it and have fun and not worry that the main character is maybe going to fail this time.
Yeah.
And so they very much just want it for that predictability, which doesn't work great for fantasy because we like the weird and the odd and the new. So doing something in a repetitive form just doesn't really work for our genre very often.
Yeah. So that's really when we talked about it and said, yeah, we're gonna push back on the specific of having a full character arc every book. You know, our character by the end of part 1, like, we have arcs defined for different characters and where they're going to end up. And then different changes that are going to come in part 2, and then a whole different set of changes in part 3. And there's going to be new characters and different stuff introduced. So there's going to be some of that, but our intention is it's just going to keep building and building and broadening until, all the chaos happens.
Yeah, so it's really about the character arc is really about the shift. So like at the beginning of this book, you very much have Tuara being naive, stuck in her ways kind of thing. And at the end, that's a little different. She's coming into herself. She's more confident. So that's the shift that makes that character arc feel good to readers, basically.
Yeah.
And that's really all you need. You don't have to have them night and day from the beginning to the end, because that's what you're going to show over the whole series.
Yeah.
But for just the one book, just having enough of that to show there is a shift is really what you need.
Yeah. So this is why we like Liz's feedback. Because she can say things like that we're like, yes, exactly. Now, how do we put that in here and fix what is broken?
Yes.
So Liz just came on. We introduced her as she did some content editing for us, but you have some things that you do on your own. Liz has a newsletter that she puts out. You have, what are your degrees in? I don't remember.
I'm kind of all over the place, and,
Yeah.
and it has absolutely nothing to do with books, although I do use it for books.
Yes.
So I am an overachiever. So in undergrad, I did a double major and a double minor. My majors are in sociology and Spanish. My minors are in French and criminal justice. And then I went on to get a master's in forensic linguistics. So it's sort of in the same area. I was streamlining towards a career. But then I got into it and I realized, criminal justice is really depressing.
It's like all chapter 15.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, like super interesting to study, but in reality, not super great to live. And so I decided to go with a career change.
Yeah. Well, and from what I have seen, at least, from an editor and a content editor and giving feedback perspective, the experience that you have and the degrees that you have, like going to school and getting a degree in just like writing. I'm like, I don't know that really makes you a good writer.
Yeah, it's not necessary. It can be helpful, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But you do not have to have it in order to be a writer.
Yeah. Well, so I went to school for mechanical engineering, and what I learned while I was in college is that there's a pull from the engineering field to get engineers to go into fields like neurology or surgery, or not necessarily general practitioners, but to get mechanical engineers in particular to go into the medical field. Because you may not apply anything engineering whatsoever, but the problem solving and the critical thinking that you have to figure out on the engineering side carries over really well. The same thing with law. A lot of engineers will do their undergrad in engineering and then go into the medical field or the legal field.
Yeah, I think I had an attorney friend that actually told me that if you're going to go to law school, it's actually better not to have an undergraduate degree in law. You want it in something different.
Yeah.
It just helps.
Yeah. So that's where I see the benefit of, and I'm like, where I see the genius from your mind in the feedback and the analysis that you give is that you're not coming from here's the structured rules of writing. It's, criminals do this, and psychologically people act like this, and linguistically there's these things you can manipulate to tell this story. And I'm like, I see all that come out on the page when you give us feedback. So
Yeah, I do draw from all of it. It's not overt, but it does all stem from it.
yeah.
Plus, I did a lot of thesis writing, so, I had plenty of practice writing. Nonfiction, but, it's still practice.
That doesn't sound fun
Yeah.
at all.
I mean, it actually is. I love to learn. I think that's one of the things that makes writers fun is we like to learn random things. We don't want to be an expert in anything, but we want to know everything, and we can use that to put in our books. So it's kind of like a license to learn.
Yeah. From a writing perspective, like I said, you have a newsletter that you send out. Where can people find that to get the genius that's coming out?
Don't build me up too much. So I have my website, lizverity.com, and at the bottom of that is a sign up for a newsletter. And you can sign up for my quarterly newsletter, which basically talks about my updates as a writer. And then I also have a weekly newsletter, which is weekly writing tips for authors. It's basically, I started it because I was learning all this stuff, and I found that in order to keep it in my head, it's easier if I teach it to someone else. So I started that as almost like a log to help me, and then I put it out there for other people in case it helped them, and I found that a lot of people really enjoy it. So
yeah, I get Liz's weekly newsletter and her weekly writing tips. I haven't read all of them.
Yeah, there's a lot. I mean, it's every week, so everybody's busy.
But I save it, and I'm like, this is a repository of really good knowledge. And so I can go back and be like, oh yeah, we're going to look at this, like this type of character analysis. What does Liz have to say about that? And we can go look there and see what's in there. So yeah, I enjoy the constant or the continuous
Well, good.
information that is
Keeps me
available.
on my toes too, so I have to keep learning. It's I can't be stagnant, so I enjoy that part of it.
So go check out lizverity.com and sign up for her newsletter. Along those lines, I hadn't even asked you about, I have never asked you what it is like specifically you're writing about. Do you want to talk about that at all? Or is it hush hush?
I can talk about it briefly. I don't like to talk about it like too much because I don't like people excited about it if it doesn't come out for years. But I write epic fantasy as well. Mine is more less Tolkienish and more like Brett Weeks. If you've read him, he does like the Lightbringer series and stuff. But it's kind of like regular people in a different world, and they have access to magic in some way. So mine, it follows 3 POV characters. I have a scholar, a con artist, and a shapeshifter. And they're all recruited by a clandestine government agent, and their job is to infiltrate the ruling class and try to uncover a plan of a traitor. So I like the action, and I'm huge into characters, so I like the team dynamics and things like that. So that's my general direction right now.
Okay. Yeah, so Liz is in the Springfield Writers Guild with us.
Yes.
And we call them hot seats, where somebody brings out their so many pages of their story and we read it together. We just did one today where earlier today we had a guild meeting and we read through some pages that one of the guild members had brought in. And so far, let's see, a year and a half. So I've been in the guild a year and a half now.
Yeah, that sounds right.
About a year and a half. I haven't seen any of Liz Verity's stuff.
You actually missed the months that I did. I did. I threw out a short story that I was doing for fun, and I don't think you guys were there that week.
We may have had market.
May have.
Yeah,
so we do farmers market with my sister.
But yeah, so it was there. It's not my fault.
Okay. I'll have to go back. I'll have to see if I have anything in the emails, because I'm like, Liz has given us really good advice.
But can she
actually do this? Is this one of those who can't do teach?
Yeah, no, that is a very valid thing to think about. I do obviously have my weaknesses. I'm part of a couple critique groups that I throw chapters out to them weekly, and they kind of help me give feedback and things like that. So I don't like to take too much time in the guild ones because I know a lot of them don't have partners that they can go through But yeah, I'll have to throw out something soonish so that you guys can see.
Yeah.
Or I could just email you, and I guess I don't have to have a guild to do it.
So how is it from your critique group? Because there's a couple other guild members that are in different critique groups. How does that work for you?
Oh, I love it. I actually met my partners on a class that I did online. We're kind of all over the world. So we meet on Zoom, and we meet every week. Somebody throws out so many words. We kind of have a limit on, okay, this is what we're going to do. And each week we rotate on who's getting feedback and just kind of do a deep dive into the books, and we just go through order. So like I'll send them chapter 2, and then when it's my turn again, I'll send them chapter 3, or however long I can throw out. How many words I can throw? I always hit the max. So it's actually really nice, and that's one thing is being an author. Like you have to have feedback. You know, I'm an editor, and everybody, you know, you guys think I'm doing great edit for you guys, but I can't do that for myself. I mean, I can to an extent, but because you're in it, it's hard for you to see.
Yeah.
So you've got to have that outside perspective, someone that's going to be honest and be able to see what it is you need to improve on and then follow that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, my job during the day, you know, my daytime job is I'm an engineer, and I have to try to solve factory problems constantly. And I get boxed into a little tunnel, and I'm like, I can't, like, there's only one way to do this, and I can't figure out how to get through it. And then I'll turn and ask the guy next to me. I'll be like, hey, I'm trying to figure this out. And he'll look over and be like, oh, yeah, you just got to do blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, I want to punch you right in the face.
Yeah, that's often how it works, especially with writing. You look at it and you're like, why didn't I see that?
Yeah, exactly.
But, yep.
So from a critique perspective, how do they do pretty good in the actual critique group of not just being like, we love this. This is great. And you're like, thanks.
Yeah, no, they do a great job. When you start a group or you start in a group, there's always an adjustment period of getting to know each other, trying to figure out weaknesses, who's strong at what, and then building that trust as well. Because as you guys found out, getting honest feedback is sometimes hard.
Yes.
So you've got to be able to build that trust and respect, and then once you do that, you can just openly say anything.
Yeah.
And they know you're doing it out of love. They want you to be better. So we can really kind of dig in there, and every now and then they'll hit me hard and be like, this person, you know, doesn't have any reason to be in the story. And I'm like, but I love them. Yeah. So it's hard to hear. But yeah, once you build up that trust and respect, it works really well.
Yeah. I will say one of the things you said that kind of took my brain down a little bit of a train of thought there was you said it's really hard to get honest feedback from, you know, part of that, there's truth there in that sometimes people are afraid to give you real feedbacks. They don't want to hurt your feelings or tell you like, your story is kind of crap. And
yeah,
you know,
I've definitely given critiques, and the person thanked me and walked away and never talked to me again.
Yeah.
It happens. It's part of the publishing process, and some people just can't handle it, and that's fine.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's hard.
But a flip side to that is like there are some people that have read and will ask for feedback, and people that we can say like, well, what did you think was wrong with it? And they'll say, well, maybe like a little bit here, a little thing here, if you wanted to tweak it. But there are a couple people, you know, I can't say everybody, but I can say that, and it is really like ego boosting, like, pacha, when you talk to somebody and they're like, no, I love this. Mm-hmm. And if you're like, well, we just got a critique and they took a dump all over it, and there's a whole bunch of stuff we need to fix. And they're like, well, that person's wrong. You know? And you're like, I love you. You're the best person on the planet.
Yes, I call those emotional support readers.
Yes.
We all have to have them. For me, it's my sister.
Yeah.
She reads it and she says everything is amazing every single time. It doesn't matter. It can be absolutely awful. And
Yeah.
she will say it's awesome. So there's definitely a place for them.
Well, even like, not to like, when you say like, sorry, I'm trying to think of what I'm trying to say here. Like that, when you say your sister says, or when your sister says, I love it, even if you're like, well, it's really terrible. And she's telling me I love it because she's supporting me. Is she saying it to support you, or does she actually?
She actually loves it.
Okay. That's what I was getting at is there are people that I'm like, I could give them something and they might be like, I didn't really like that. But when it's something that, we've had our book and given it to people and we've pushed and pushed and pushed and been like, no, I'm trying to twist your arm. Tell me, say, uncle, what's wrong? And they're like, no, I just love it and I want more. And I'm like, these are the best. I need all my fans like this. I need everybody in the world to just read my books through this person's eyes.
Well, I will tell you with your guys' book, when you emailed it to me, there's always that moment when you offer to do a critique for someone you don't know.
Yeah.
Where you're like, okay, I'm going to open the document and I have no idea what's going to be on the other side. Like I've had ones that have opened and there's no punctuation and I'm like, okay, this is going to be fun. So, I was like, okay, all right. We're going to do this. This is like, these guys sound like they know what they're talking about. We're just going to open it. So
Yeah.
I open it up and I start reading it. And I looked at it. I was like, this is gold. Like, even with everything that I gave you feedback on, I was like, okay, these guys know how to write. They can convey what they want. They have great character, an intriguing world. Like, okay, they're going to make it. This is going to be good. So even like getting to the end of it, and, me saying, like, there's no plot and where's the character arc and all that kind of stuff, I still loved the book.
Yeah.
I understood why all your beta readers were like, it's amazing, because it was still well done. There's just, my job is to figure out ways to make it better. So that's what I do. But it really was good.
That's awesome to hear.
Yeah. Very.
But also, like, when we've gone through and read our own stuff, there'll be things we haven't read in a while, and we'll go back when we've read out loud, and then we go through and we edit and edit and edit for months, and then go back and read again. And I've said this before, where we'll start reading, and I'm like, I just want to sit down and read this story. Like, I just want to read it. And sometimes I'm like, I feel confident in my ability to write and express on the page, with the caveat of, if I'm writing chapter 15, I can express everything I want to say and get the emotions and everything into chapter 15. So if somebody picks up chapter 15, they're going to be like, I love this. But if you write, and this is kind of my fear, is if we write 30 chapter 15s that individually you're like, oh, I love reading this chapter. Oh, I love reading the next chapter. But if you get 5 chapters in and you're like, what's the story about? I'm not really sure, but I really love reading it.
Yep.
I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah. And that's kind of what you guys had at the beginning. It was really fun to read. You just didn't have the plot. And then this one, you fixed it. Like, there is a plot, and it is fun to read. So it's like a double whammy.
Yeah. So, I don't know. We still have a long road ahead of us. Your book, you were saying, how many words is your current
so it
version?
Is 250,000 words, which for readers who don't know what that means, that's essentially like 3 or 4
it's about
books.
2 of these.
Oh, is it?
A little over 2 of these.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, so I was going to say, most people want 100,000 words max nowadays. So, yeah, it's like 2.5 of the normal size book. So, a little long, but I love complexity, so.
Yeah. See, that is... Well, let me ask you this first. when you've told somebody, well, I'm writing a book. It's the first one. Do you know? Well, first of all, do you know how many? Do you have a plan for how many are going
It's
to be in your
supposed to be a
series?
trilogy.
Trilogy. We've heard that somewhere before.
I
Like,
know, right?
So, what have people told you when you say, "Well, I'm writing a book." Oh, how long is it? And you're like, 250,000 words. What's the response? The typical response you get, or is there one?
Well, if they know how big that is, it's a different response than other people who are like,
Yeah.
and how long is that?
Yeah, if like people who are in the writing
In
world
the writing
and
world.
they know what 250,000 words translates into.
Yeah, say most of them like choke, their eyes pop out of their heads, the norm. And then their immediate response is usually, well, you could just break it in half.
Yeah.
Or, something like that. So most people don't want a book that big, but the thing is most of the books that fantasy writers read right now are that big.
Yeah.
They just don't realize it. But publishers right now don't want to go past that because of cost of paper and all that jazz. So
Yeah.
it's, business versus what the readers want. You don't really know, but
So the reason I kind of asked that line of questioning is that when was originally the second half of this, which is now volume 2.
Mm-hmm.
We wrote it all together as one book, and it was part 1 and part 2 in one book, and we were at 250,000 words.
yep. Mm-hmm.
And now this one is 150,000
That's
words.
145.
145,000. Book 2 is probably going to be closer to
To 200.
200, maybe a little over 200,000. We're just at the pace that we have set up right now with the revisions that we're going through. So it's going to be up there.
It's gonna be bigger.
But what a lot of feedback we got when people who know what that word count means, when we say, well, we're right around 250,000 words. We had people that would be immediately like, you need to not do that.
Yeah.
They're like, you need
immediate
to,
discouragement.
Yeah. They're like, whatever that story is, if it's 250,000 words, you need to cut 200,000 words out of that story. Like, don't change it. Don't break it up. Write a different story.
Take out subplots, take out characters. They basically want you just to redo it.
Yeah. And we got that a lot.
Yeah. Until that's with people not reading any of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If they would read some of it, then they'd be like, I can see why this is so long.
Yeah, we did get there were a couple people that told us that directly, and then they read just a couple of chapters. And then we're like, I wouldn't cut any of this. And we're like, but you said.
Yeah. And that's
Well,
similar.
and they're like, no, this, yeah, you keep writing it. And we're like, 250,000 words. And they're like, well, it should be 100,000. We're like, but that means cut this. And they don't cut that.
Yeah.
We're like, well, you can't have it both ways.
It's similar to what I would get, especially with my critique group. I was like, look, guys, I need to cut. So, help me figure out ways to cut. And, all their feedback was like, don't cut. And
Yeah.
I'm like, well, okay, but this is really big for the industry, supposedly. And they're like, have you looked at word counts lately? Because epic fantasies are that big. It's just that they have big names behind them, so publishers will do it.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I'm hoping that one day somebody will do it, because I love the bigger the book, the better for me, especially if it's a good
Exactly.
story.
We finally just said, you know what? I like reading really long books. If I picked up a book and I'm like, if it's like the old, whatever encyclopedia thick, like this is 10,000 pages long and it's all one book, it's 1.5 million words. Was it a good story? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, as
Sure.
long as it's pushing the plot forward, great. If you're just putting in chapters for world building or extra details,
Yeah.
maybe not. But if you can read that big of a book and not feel like it was that long of a book, then
Yeah.
I'd hope that people don't change their story, but
Yeah,
They might.
There are books that I've read where I'm getting to the end and I'm like, well, Susie Brindle is one of the readers. So shout out to Susie. She's been fan since day one. Woot woot. But she's like, hey guys, I got the book and I'm reading it. And she's like, and I know book 2 won't be out for a little bit. So I've been really dragging my feet on finishing it because there's the next book isn't there.
Yep.
And I'm like, I found myself doing that where I'm on like page 697. And then I'm like, I have to read slower because there's only like 40 pages left. And then it's going to run out of book.
Oh, I've definitely been there. It's like I don't want it to end.
Yeah. So I don't know. It's interesting. I mean, for us, because it's a first book, that was also a big thing of, wait, you're writing a series to start with? And it's a giant, fat series? No. You're going to fail. That's terrible. Don't ever do that. And we're like, all the rules that we were told are like, we're doing all of the wrong. We're breaking all of them.
Well, we did. I mean, when we had it originally in 2 parts, 1 book, we had a natural break there. It was like,
Yeah.
let's break it and then work on this first half and get it, not perfect, but get it done the way we want it, and then we can put it out and move on to book 2. And so there was a natural break. It wasn't like we just went, okay, this is page whatever, rip it in half. You know, there was a natural break to the story.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I don't think we would have broke it.
Yeah. Well, along those lines, Liz, prologues and epilogues, yay or nay?
Prologues and epilogues. They depend. I'm a fan of epilogues just because it usually gives one of 2 things. It either completes the resolution, basically, of you get to get that final, like, look into the future of how things are better or whatever. Or it does something that totally twists how you see the whole book.
Yeah.
And I love both of those. And plus, if it's a good book, readers are always like, oh, 1 more chapter. So it's kind of like almost like fulfilling that for them. As far as prologues, I think it just depends. Most people argue that they aren't necessary. I think it depends on the story. Like for your guys's, I like your prologue. I think it adds to the story and gives you something that the main character wouldn't have known. And that's kind of almost what puts the whole story in motion.
Yeah.
So I think that was important. But that being said, your original prologue was just world building.
Yes.
And if that's going to be the case, then maybe not. So
Yeah.
it just depends.
So with our books, because of the way we're writing them and how we broke up between book 1 and 2, one of the things that opened up for us is I'm a fan of prologues and epilogues, but one of the reasons I like how it's turning out with our books. So because we have book 1 is written, 2 is written, 3 is written, and we've already got prologue, prologue. And for us, it's more like, because this book 1 is like chapter 1 of 14 chapters kind of thing. It's more of, here's an intermission with this is going to add to the plot. This is going to be something that's going to come up a little bit later. And it's all relative to something that is going to happen like immediately and from a different perspective. And so it's been kind of fun to be like, hey, we need to fit this piece in and it needs to be from this character's perspective. And we already have some of that, like between books 3 and 4, where we're like, well, instead of writing a new chapter or going with a new plot line, we've got this intermission spot where we can tie the prologue of this book and the epilogue, or the epilogue of this book and the prologue of this book together. So when you finish the epilogue and then you pick up the prologue and you're like, wait a minute, this is connected. And these are going to show up here, hopefully.
It's kind of almost like, putting a scavenger hunt in for your readers of like foreshadowing and reveals and kind of seeing behind the curtain. So it is cool.
Yeah. So for us, it's been fun. It's been fun as we've broken things up. Yeah, it makes our book, it's not the massive books that, they're fewer words because we broke it up more. But it means we get to write more in between there and fit stuff in between that wouldn't have been there otherwise.
Yeah.
So.
And it'd be less intimidating for anybody new to epic fantasies that maybe want to try it out. It'd be like, oh, it's just a little book. I can try it. And then you got them hooked for like the whole series.
Yeah. We're like, psych. Like, oh, this is book 1? What? There's 1 million more words? There's 14 more books? What the heck?
Yes.
Well, anything else that you would like to share with our wonderful listeners about you or your creative process or editing? So one of the things we're trying to do, we want to encourage people to go out and create.
Mm-hmm.
If you were going to give somebody your epic wisdom tip to leave with somebody, to encourage them to create, whether it's writing or it can be from a writing perspective.
Okay. So my big thing, especially when it comes to stories, is characters and character arcs. So if you are writing a story, I just encourage you to look at your protagonist, your main character, and ask, what is their goal? Both externally, what do they want to accomplish in the world? And internally, who do they want to be? And then use those to guide every scene in your book. That will give it a connectivity. Yes. And it'll help just, I guess, kind of make your scenes roll together, and you'll feel like in the end that they've accomplished this journey and they've done so much working towards it. So that's really my big advice, is make sure you have a goal.
All right.
So that's the kind of thing that you can go read in her weekly email that you can go get from her.
Yes, yes. And if you want to look at the backlog, there is a whole bunch of posts on my website from, I think I've been doing it for 3 years now. So there's quite a bit up there.
Yeah. Lots of thoughts. Lots of crazy ranting and raving. Oh, wait. No.
Yes, I do get to know that sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah, I've thought about doing a newsletter thing, and I'm like, I don't know if I want people. We're doing this podcast. I don't know how deep I want people into my head. I don't know. They don't have institutions anymore. So I'm kind of safe there. Okay. Well, thanks, Liz, for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
We'll probably, hopefully, if, when we get off of here, if she's not like, I hated that, we'll try to have her back again. Maybe sometime in the future, we will have Liz on and be announcing an upcoming book.
Potentially. But until then, go get, A Flight from Shadows and read it, because it's amazing.
Yep. Do that. What she said. She has sage advice. Follow it. Well, thanks for joining us today. We appreciate you being here with us. And we look forward to finding out more, meeting with more people and finding out what happens to our characters in the next episode. We'll see you then. Until then, go in good spirits. Thanks for listening to the Creators Guild podcast. Don't forget to get your copy of A Flight from Shadows, available on Amazon. While you're there, please rate it and give it a review. If you like the Creators Guild, please like and subscribe, and make sure to share it with your friends. Until next time, go in good spirits.